plate.
Oh, good evening, panel. I want to say that I believe that all of the panelists have said some really, really poignant statements thus far, and I kind of want to take a little bit of the onus from the parents, and I want to put it on the teachers, because I've taught high school English for 3 years, and I've spoken to parents who really do have maybe 3, 4 children. They're the only parent in the home. And when you're a single parent in a home, and you really might be working at McDonald's, you might be the manager of that McDonald's, and you have these 3 kids that you're trying to put through college, or rather help finish high school and put through college. It's difficult to be at that school all the time, and it's difficult to be home when they get home. It's difficult to catch up with them, especially at the high school age. When you're at an elementary school age, it's a little bit different because they're still looking to you for answers. But once they get to that teenage stage, they're not finding those answers on their own. And that's when I put a lot of the onus on the teachers. Reason being is because those teachers, we have a way of reaching students the way parents never could, especially the teachers today. And the teachers of this generation are much, much younger. And that's because of programs like Teach for America. That's because of specialized programs in colleges that are built to market towards the young adults. So we can go into these schools and be someone that they can see and relate to. And I think a major issue as far as the achievement gap, especially I teach college now. As a professor, I can really understand that the achievement gap stems in the way these individuals are being taught. And when you have a teacher in a classroom that has only been there for a year, hasn't had the chance to develop their craft or develop themselves fully, they don't have the full support of their administration because they're giving real test grades, it becomes an issue. The incorporation of the education system doesn't support the proper training of these new teachers. And parents are aside, because once they get to high school, parents, from my experience in the inner city school system, parents don't have as much effect on these students as their teachers can. We have them for longer. We have them for 8 hours a day, where they might go to work after school and see their parents for just a couple of hours in the evening. So I believe that it's most important to take the new teachers and train them properly, give them mentoring skills, give them classes, and then once you join that bridge between young adult and these teenagers, now we can transition all the messages from the older adults. Because to a teenager, it just sounds like you have to do this, you have to do that. And we're not, as was said earlier, we're not explaining the why behind it. We're not giving them the broader picture. And we need training. We need help. Teachers need help. We need administration that will support newer books. We need administration and district leaders and superintendent leaders that will say, you know what, okay, we're going to change Catcher in the Rye to The Third Life of Grange Copeland. You know, books that can excite their attention, excite their knowledge, and books that they'll connect to. So I would really say we need to look at our education system instead of just looking at the parents and the students themselves. We need to look at how these students are being educated and who's in the classroom teaching them before we can really, really have an effective change.
Fantastic. So I'd like to get each of your opinion of the literature. Rocky brought this up. I'd like to get each of your opinion about the literature that's put before our kids. And I especially like to hear from J.M. Benjamin and Moses Miller. My daughter brought home a 4-page reading list. And she had to write an essay last year that was going to be 50% of her grade. And she had to read this book and really break it out and, dissect it. Well, I covered the pages, and I just didn't want to get angry right away, and I slowed down and I read them again. There were only 3 black books to choose from and 1 Hispanic book. And out of 4 pages of book titles, I was somewhat offended. And I would like for Moses, how do you feel about the literature that's being put forth? Because I just don't see a young black boy in Harlem maybe really being interested in what Shakespeare wrote 400, 500, 600 years ago. I could be wrong.
Well, my feeling on that is that, I agree with you. I think that at some point they may be interested in that, but unfortunately, in a lot of cases it takes, even with me, I mean, I've been reading for, my mother and my father used to read to me from as far back as I could remember, so I've always had a love for reading, but most of the kids that I mentor and deal with, you have to get something that, if they don't have a love for reading, it has to be something that catches their attention. And once they develop that love, then it may lead to them reading Native Son or Ralph Ellison or quite, possibly even transitioning over to Shakespeare or some of the other classics that they are required to read in school. But what happens is that I've encountered some very good principals, I'll be honest, that have, tasked their teachers with saying they don't have to read these books on his reading list. We need them to become proficient with reading. And he's opened it up to, actually have them include that the Barakami has been required reading in certain schools. And I've been able to get other authors' books as required readings in certain schools as well, which has assisted with getting, kids to actually gravitate towards reading more than they had in the past. But we have to find ways and creative means and ways to make it, interesting and help them to grasp and gravitate towards literature. And if we're putting stuff in front of them that they can't relate to, it's not going to work. It doesn't work. And that is a problem.
So, J.M., you may have been on this panel with me during Black History Month a couple of years ago. I was talking to Quan and Shannon Holmes and some other urban lit authors and said that at that time, this was maybe 4 years ago, I really didn't like kids reading urban literature. And Quan asked me if my daughter went to public school, and I told him yes. He said then she needs to read urban lit because... And you do too, because he was saying I need to read what's going on in her world. What they were writing about and talking about in urban literature is what she sees in D.C. going to school every day. And so we both need to be more open to this. So, J.M., how do you feel about the literature in school? And do you think that it's okay for the young guys to read urban literature? Is it ever can be used as a learning tool?
Absolutely. I believe that urban fiction has there's a major misconception of what it represents and what it comes from. I write urban fiction to deter and derail our youth, from some of the choices and decisions that I made in the past and what came behind them. I also use urban fiction to educate our young people. I believe that every parent that has young teens should try at least one urban fiction. I don't believe that all of our books in the genre are the same, but I can tell you J.M. Benjamin urban lit book has a moral to the story, and there are consequences and repercussions behind the character's actions when their actions are negative. I believe that I am a father of 3 teens, and since I've been an author, my children have been allowed to read what I write, and I write graphic tales that are fueled by reality, and I believe that that's what Quan was trying to convey to you back then, that your daughter is being exposed to what we write. My own children are exposed to what I write. My own children know that I come from what I write. Just this year alone, they've lost, both of my daughters are seniors now, and they've lost at least 7 young people that they thought would walk across the stage with them to receive a diploma. It may not be your reality or all of the listeners' reality, but it is someone's reality, not someone, but somebody's. And that's what urban fiction represents. It represents what goes on in urban communities, and not just the projects, because it's spreading. It's an epidemic with, gang violence, street violence, which are like leading causes of the demise of our young people at an early stage. And, I believe that urban fiction can be used as a dictionary to communicate. You know, my book, Memoirs of an Accidental Hustler, the title speaks for itself. You know, people want to know, how do you become an accidental hustler? The book speaks about how you can take some, well-behaved, well-mannered, well-groomed children, good background, and place them into a negative setting. And when there's lack of supervision due to the fact that parents are at work, or in the book's particular case, one parent was incarcerated, the other parent was in school and at work. What happens when your children are exposed to other children who are exposed to drugs, alcohol, violence, negativity, so on and so forth? The book was inspired and fueled by my own background. You know, my mother and my community would have thought that I would have gone off to be a doctor or an attorney, but I went on to be this big drug dealer and spent over a dozen years in prison. So, again, that's what urban fiction is about, you know, what goes on, you know, in homes and in communities, some communities, and some of our people. So definitely, if you have a child that is wearing a color more frequently than, than they have been, or their friends have changed, or their speech has changed, you definitely need to get involved, even if their reading has changed. And I always say this, the mind is like any other muscle. It has to be exercised. And if urban fiction is not your choice of read, it can be the beginning weight that you pick up to exercise the mind, for you to go on to increase in weight, meaning other genres or the self-help, motivation, or what have you. But Moses hit it right on the head. You know, when you're dealing with our young people and what they're reading, it has to be something that they can make a connection to and something that will hold their interest. And just like with rap music and gangster movies and, you know, things of that nature, that's what urban fiction offers our young people. So, you know, I don't necessarily condone young people reading pornographic material, but when it comes to urban fiction, it comes from what we come from, you know, and many of the parents come from it, but just, you know, trying to stay away from it. But it's inevitable when it comes to our youth because it's all around them.
Okay.
Kelly, can I jump in real quick and just talk about boys and literature? This is Patrick Oliver again. There's a project we do called Encouraging Our Sons to Read. We have a Facebook page on it, and that's its primary focus. To get back what you initially talked about, Ella, was those books that our boys are bringing home and don't necessarily mirror who they are, their environments. You know, like the brother was saying, we have to get books that mirror their environments, you know, whether they're urban fiction or whether they're classic literature pieces like Claude Brown, Man Child in the Promised Land. That's what books should turn me on. Nathan McCall, you know, Make Me Want to Holler, you know, they can relate to that. Haki Madhubuty's Yellow Black, which is a book about Haki Madhubuty, who's a profound publisher, poet, writer, author of 25 books, but his story relates to young people. Chris Gardner, his memoir, talks about hunger and poverty, just like Richard Wright talks about in Man Child from the Promised Land, you know, that hunger. You know, so, and Omar Tariq wrote a great book, 12 Brown Boys, published by Just Us Books, a book publishing company, a great 12 short chapters, different black boys talking about different things, entrepreneurship, living on the street, mentoring, you know, being an athlete. Great book for young people. Derek Barnes just put out a great book, We Could Be Brothers, about, you know, these young brothers, teenagers, young adult book, fantastic book. So there are a number of books out there, you know, that don't just urban fiction, but books that are classic literature, books that, you know, that's modern genre. We just got, you know, again, do the work, go to the library, ask the librarian. You know, they're our best source of information that we grossly underutilize. Our public librarians, they are walking bibliophiles. They got information that we couldn't imagine. They know about all the books that are coming out, again, but not utilized. And those are our tax dollars.
I like to jump in a little bit, Ella.
So let's utilize that.
Okay. Is this Dr. Darryl?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
I think Patrick and JM has a good question. But see, one of the things I experience is that a lot of the boys, not just black boys, they hate reading. And so one of the things that I think we need to do is to reach them where they're at. And one of the things I started with my nephews and my own sons when they were little is around the country I was hearing from their parents that they really weren't doing well in school. And so what we decided to do was to do a conference call once a month and had the boys talk about the books, what they read, and we gave them rewards. They liked their competition, but it was a way introducing them to some books that they wouldn't have read. But I just think, we just have to. A lot of the boys hate reading. Some of them are scared to read. Some of them have a complex, and for most cases, it's not cool. So I just think it takes some engagement. To have more males taking on that engagement, and like I say, reaching kids. But certainly that conference call worked well. But the problem I had is I had to move on. I had other things going on. I could not get a relative to sustain it. So one of my greatest concerns is that we have a good idea to help black males, but if that one person leaves, there's no one to help sustain it. And that's really what's happening to a lot of the programs across the country, that when those people, those entrepreneurs, those people, the community activists, when they leave, the programs die.
That's what homes are for. See, I want to take this back to the home.
Yeah.
Because, even when this is April Gabrielle, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Even when my son was little, I don't like putting people in boxes. I don't like saying our boys do this and our girls should do this and this. I don't. And I feel like, even when my son was little, we talked about when they start early, one thing we can do with all those books, and I did with my children, is I read with them. Just like I listen to music with them. And it doesn't matter what they want to listen to. We listen to it. My son went to listen to Tupac. I said, you need to go read Machiavelli. We're going to do this together. My daughter went to, let's talk about this. And I agree, teaching them to be critical thinkers and guide them towards why they choose the things they choose. But we would read books together, to see, so that they had an understanding. And I enjoyed that very much. I also remember going into a school one time with a young boy, and he was out in the 5th grade. Young African-American boy, they had me come into the school. He was reading a 2nd grade book, and guess what? They were allowing him to do this. He's reading the book on colors of M&Ms. And I walked over to him. I said, what are you doing? And he says, well, this is what they gave me. And guess what he did? He kept reading it. I said, I want you to go over there and choose a book about something you understand, something you like, something you relate to. And so he goes over to all these hundreds of books in the library, and I said he didn't know what to do. I said, what is your hobby? What do you like to do when you're not at school? He said, play basketball. I said, find a book on basketball. He sat down with me, and I looked at the way he pronunciated. I watched the way he moved his tongue. I watched how he couldn't even say the word dribble. I said, excuse me, when you're running up and down that court with that ball, what are you doing? Dribbling. That's the word. And so a lot of times, you're right, we don't take time with them, and I'm going back to the parents. Parents. Please, I can't, I'm a firm believer. I don't want to depend on these schools to educate my children. I don't trust these schools to educate my kids. I want to use them just as a vessel to get them to where they have to go. I'm not sure about the rest of you, but in California, there is a law. And since 1995, it's called the Family School Partnership Act, and it's a labor code where they allow parents. An employer has to allow a parent to leave work to go with their children. I think it's 8 hours a month or 4 hours a month, but under law, you have every right, and they cannot fire you. They don't have to pay you, but you can take that time or vacation, but they cannot keep you from going to the school to volunteer with your children.
Now, I actually would like to speak on that, and I think it's a real blessing when you can have a parent at home, and I think it's a blessing for those children who have parents like you who can say, my mom sat with me and she read with me. Now let's talk about the majority of students in the inner city school system who are affected by the achievement gap. Let's talk about the foster children. Let's talk about the adopted children who are possibly in abusive homes. These are real situations, and that's why I will always have a part of me that says yes, the parent, because it starts at home. But now we have to deal with the children who are experiencing the meat of the problem. And when you don't have a parent at home, then it is on the teacher. It's on the teacher and it's on the school system to choose professionals who know how to test our children. And a big part of the reason why a lot of my students didn't like to read the books that were on grade level, and mind you, I taught high school, and it's because they couldn't. So you have a student that says, I don't want to read, leave me alone, and you have a teacher who knows nothing about this young black man. This teacher is from the other side of the world, from a suburban neighborhood. She has never had any experience with any individual like this. And we have a person like this teaching 30 of our young black men. They don't know how to reach these kids. They don't know how to speak to them. They don't know how to test them. And this is my problem. So while onus should always be put on the parents, I'm talking about the children who are most affected by this epidemic. And the epidemic is the achievement gap, and it's growing wider. They took our vocational schools. They took our special training, you know, and there was a point where the dropout rate was a lot lower when we had, I mean, I'm not sure if you all are familiar with New York, but there's a school called Edison. It is focused on training vocations, mechanics, electricians, plumbers, things of that nature. These students used to get out. I had a friend of mine who had graduated from Edison, $21 an hour. He was a trained electrician. We don't have those schools anymore. You know, so the question is, while parents are responsible, yes, they are. There are students, the students that have parents at home, they're going to be fine. They could have a garbage teacher all 12 years of their, you know, experience, all 12 grades. But what about those students who don't have parents? And not because the parents can't or choose not to, but because they're just not there. You know, how do we educate these folks? And I think it goes back to the professionals in the community. The professionals have left the community. The professionals don't even know what's going on in the community. And I put it on the authors. If you are writing urban fiction, if you are writing any fiction that you feel connects to this demographic, you should be in the school. Why aren't you all calling? And I really don't mean to, you know, point a finger. I'm saying it in a way where I'm saying, you know, let's bring the community back to the school. You know, call the school, call the principal. Let's call the principal in your neighborhood. I have a new book coming out. I'm sure it'll touch a lot of your students. I would love to come in and speak. I will bet my next check that any principal would say, absolutely, come on down here. I would love to have you speak, because it is so rare that we get people from the community to speak in our school system. All you really have to do is reach out. And sometimes those principals don't know who to call because they're from a completely different generation. So we have to take these things into consideration when we think about, you know, how do we close this achievement gap? Because it's happening among our black boys, and our young black men. You know, the girls, they're socialized a little bit differently. They're socialized to, you know, go for it, do well in school, be quiet, sit still. It fits the school and it fits that behavior pattern. But our young men are socialized more in their community, and their community might be their friends, or their community might be, you know, the older fellows that are on the block, and those aren't necessarily professionals. So we really have to think about the young black men who don't necessarily have that strong parental figure. What are we doing for them? How can we help them and bring them back? How can we assist their reading skills? You know?
I just wanted to interject for a second. This is Moses, because you bring up a lot of good points. I mean, as an author of fiction and nonfiction, I'm actually in 6 different schools right now, and that was one of the first things I did, was reach out to schools that I've graduated from, schools in my community now, and then schools in at-risk, where at-risk kids are located. So I've done programs in various schools. I think something that was brought up earlier that we have to be very careful of is that a lot of times what happens with our young males is that we may say, like, a statement was made that our young men don't like to read. How do we know they don't like to read?
Right.
If the thing about it is that what we've exposed or put in front of them, a lot of times our expectations for them, I know teachers who have already started, you know, their class, or they approach the kids as this. A teacher once told a group of students when they were talking about college, she told a group of Latino and African American students that they should focus on community college. A girl said she wanted to go to Harvard, and she said, I think you should be more realistic. Now, if your expectations going in are that They don't like to read as opposed to figuring out if I could expose them to something. They don't like to read this, like, for instance, with my son. My son, I have 4 children. My son is the youngest. Books my girls would read, and I would bring to him Charlotte's Web. He wanted no interest in it. I had to figure out what he liked to read, what type of story was, grabbed his attention. And from that point, he developed a love for stories and a love for reading. However, if we just throw lesson plans, like a teacher will feel that if a lesson plan worked the last 20 years and this group of students doesn't get it, there's something wrong with the students. Maybe you have to modify that lesson plan, because if that lesson plan, if your students are failing, it's not the students' failure, it's your failure as a teacher. You have to figure out how to work with the students that you have. You can't try to mold your students to work with the lesson plans that you've been using all of this time. And if when these teachers are teaching our kids, and I can't fault them when they have no connection to our community. So when they see our young men, they see them in music videos, they see them on TV getting arrested, and then they see these young men that come into their class and look like what they've seen on TV. Their expectations are that that's what they're going to grow up to be. And their expectations, we need to, in our schools, like you said, play more of a role and be more involved in making sure that they haven't already typecast a stereotype our young males and are molding them, or just going along with the way that society has depicted them, and that's the lane they're going to put them in. We have to be there. And if parents aren't there, because we know we have all of those issues with single-parent households and, foster children, then we, as advocates, have to be inside of these schools to speak up, because we all have a vested interest in making sure that they get the proper education they need.
Okay. All of you have brought forth some incredible points, solutions, and ideas. The chat room has been buzzing. People are loving it. And I was just really taking notes, because I'm a single parent and running my own business. I'm away a lot. I'm engaged in promoting and my authors and my work a lot. So I took a lot of notes. And Patrick, I'm going to get with you outside of this show and get a good reading list. All of those books you mentioned, get a good reading list to put in Black Pearls magazine. But right now, authors, I like for each of the authors that are on the show to go to your book and find a nice segment that you can read in 1 to 3 minutes. And then the people who are community leaders who aren't authors, I'm going to chat with them for just a second and get their contact information. And then I'm going to allow each author to read and give their website address. Readers on the phone lines, chatters in the chat room, please take note of the website and the authors' names in their books. Please consider giving these books away as multiple copies in your community. Give the gift of knowledge. So authors, select your reading material while I chat with Patrick Oliver, DJ Rocky, and I think the rest of my panel is authors. So I'm going to start with Rocky. Rocky, I know that you are a media coach now and a professional DJ. So tell us how people can contact you, and tell us briefly about the services you offer, besides being a teacher.
I am a media coach, and I do services by referral. I work with all new artists. I work with disc jockeys, and by new artists, that means rappers, R&B singers. There are other genres of R&B that I also work with. I work with groups, and it's a form of lifestyle coaching. Just the same way you have to go to school to be a doctor or a teacher or a lawyer, you kind of have to go to school to be an artist. You see a lot of nonsense on TV, and unfortunately, nobody is pulling these young folks to the side and saying, listen, this is a profession. You know, you're not just a rapper. You happen to be a certain type of mentor. You happen to be a certain type of leader. And a lot of these folks need to understand that there's a way to speak to a media professional where they don't look crazy. There's a way that you need to speak on an interview. And that doesn't mean to change who you are. That doesn't mean to hide who you are. But we don't speak the same way in our bedroom that we speak in the classroom or in the street or on a job interview. So my job is to help them understand that what they're doing is actually a profession. And I train them on how to promote positive messages, and I train them on how to answer questions the way they need to be answered and not fall into the traps that sometimes interviewers can set to build a story.
Okay, fantastic. So Patrick Oliver's line dropped. Let me see if we have if Patrick was able to call back in. Okay. So I'm going to start with the authors, and hopefully Patrick will call back in, and we'll be able to get him on the line to discuss Say It Loud, readers and writers. So, but I'm going to start with the authors and allow them to read. Please try to keep it to 1 to 3 minutes, and then give your website address and how people can purchase the book. And we'll start with April Gabrielle.
Okay, hi.
Give them the title of the book, the reading, and your website address.
Okay, the title of the book is The Myth of the Broken Home. It's a guide for single parents. The website is www.NoBrokenHome.com. And I'll just read an introduction to the book. There is nothing broken about your home. Do you understand me? Yes, Mommy. Look at me, Jamal. There will be people who would tell you that because your daddy does not live with us, your home is no good, and you can't be what you want to be. Don't you ever believe it. Do you hear me? Yes, Mommy. It has been over 15 years when I first had this conversation with my son as I dropped him off to kindergarten for the first time. And I made sure I reiterated this over and over again throughout his 18 years, primarily because we were also battling against statistics about African-American males in our society, specifically those with single-parent homes. I was determined that my son would not be a statistic or a product of a broken home. It was 1995, and I had just read an article in Time magazine about the problems involving children from divorced homes and the effects upon the children. You've heard it said that television imitates life, and maybe that is true for some, but for the majority of single parents in America today, reality isn't even close to the way that Uncle Bill raised Buffy, Jody, and Sissy in Family Affair, or Eddie's father raised Eddie in The Courtship of Eddie's Father. Even as an African-American woman, I couldn't even relate to Julia Baker as she raised Corey in Julia. And for those who find themselves too young to relate to those characters way back when, was probably mimicking Zack and Cody's single mother, Carrie Martin, of The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody. Oh, if only it were so simple. The Myth of the Broken Home is the answer to Bill Cosby's frustration expressed while addressing the audience at the NAACP's gala to commemorate the 50th anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education in Washington, D.C. About single parents in the black community, he asked, and where is his father? And why don't you know where he is? Women having children by 5, 6 different men? Under what excuse? I want somebody to love me, and as soon as you have it, you forget to parent. Grandmother, mother, great-grandmother in the same home, raising children, and the child knows nothing about the love or respect of any one of the three of them. No longer is a person embarrassed because they're pregnant without a husband. No longer is a boy considered an embarrassment if he tries to run away from being the father of an unmarried child. In the neighborhood that most of us grew up in, parenting is not going on. And Cosby's comments have triggered numerous responses from highly respectable individuals within the black community. But guess what? No one has stepped up and offered a solution. The Myth of the Broken Home is the solution to responsible single parenting, not only in the black community, but also all communities around America. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I want to thank each and every one of you for joining me tonight.